Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me, I've got Bernie Borges, and we're going to be talking about finding fulfillment in midlife, whatever that is. Bernie, it's great to see you. I've known you for 10 years or something, and always good to talk to you. Remind people where they can find you.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you as well. Easiest place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, Bernie Borges. If you see my name spelled there, and really anywhere on social, I'm most active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. But just look up Bernie Borges, and easy to find.
Fantastic. And you've got a fairly unique name, haven't you? So it's not Mike Smith. Not there's anything wrong with Mike Smith, but
Right.
Bernie Borges is a fairly
Yeah.
um,
So I do have the social media handle for my name everywhere.
And you were pretty early in adopting social media as well, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I'm an OG in that regard. I actually, Tim, you may or may not know this about me. I've only written one book in my entire life, and that book published in 2009, and it was about social media marketing strategy. And I will say that most of what's in that book
Mm.
still applies
Still applies,
because it
yeah.
is about strategy. It's about engaging, it's about
Mm.
adding value, it's about being known for something, and those principles still apply.
And so it was interesting because when I approached you about doing this, I assumed that we might be having a discussion about social media strategy, but actually we're not. We're going to be talking about midlife and things like that. Um, I'm fascinated to know why are we talking about that.
Well, I came to understand, Tim, that midlife is very misunderstood. It is something that most people have the wrong impression of what it is. Most people do. So, for example, most people think that midlife is the midpoint of life.
Yep.
Most people think that it's somewhere around age 45 because, if you live to be 90 or if you live to be 100, and of course, nobody can predict how long we're going to live. The only thing that we know is that the death rate is 100%. That's not a morbid statement, Tim. That's just reality. So most people think midlife is a midpoint in their life. And I did some research and I
Yep.
discovered that that is not the case. In reality, Tim, most of us begin our first midlife season, and please note the way I frame that up. Midlife season. We go through multiple seasons in our midlife phase of life.
Yep.
Most of us actually begin our first midlife season in our 30s.
Okay.
And
I
the
think in
reason,
my 30s, I was taking on that there was more there was responsibility. I
yeah,
think that was one of the big differences from my 20s.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, I use an example of a couple that I know that's in their mid to late 20s, and they have responsibilities with a home and a mortgage and two children that I would characterize them as their first midlife season, even though they probably would never use that phrase, that terminology.
Yeah.
But from a life phase standpoint, they've actually begun their first midlife season. You nailed it. It is about circumstances, not about age. That's why for most of us, it is our 30s. For me, my early 30s, I got married, we started a family, and it was a totally different mindset and circumstance and again, set of responsibilities compared to my 20s. And so for most of us, we begin that first season of midlife in our 30s, and we go through multiple seasons all the way up to what I'll characterize as an end of life season. And again, not to be morbid, but an end of life simply means that our health begins to decline and eventually we all pass away. Well, nobody can ever predict that. That's just a phase. So we have youth, which I characterize to somewhere around age 30 ish, give or take, depending on your circumstances. And then we have decades of midlife seasons until we reach an end of life phase, wherever that may be.
And yeah, because my partner's mother is 84, and she's got all her faculties. She's handed the keys back in on her car because she says I can't drive it anymore. And she's actually said yesterday, I think I might actually need to move into something a bit smaller and the stairs and stuff like that. So she's actually being very adult about it. But as you say, we don't know when we're going to move into those things. And I have seen phases myself in age as I've got older. So yeah. So you actually did some research, didn't you? You got, was it 267 responses to be precise?
I did. In fact, I think you were one of them. They were anonymous responses. I did not ask for a name or an email address because I wanted people to answer the questions honestly. And I asked some pretty personal questions. And so the key question that I asked, which I consider to be the most significant question, is how fulfilled are you in life? Are you totally fulfilled? Are you fulfilled but not totally fulfilled? Or are you not fulfilled at all?
And what's fulfillment?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. What is fulfillment? Because there is a difference between happiness and fulfillment.
Yes.
So let me put a definition to that. Happiness is an emotion.
Yep.
We can be happy for a short period of time. My team won today's game, so I'm happy right now, because my team won, right? Or I won a sale and I'm really happy right now because I won the sale, right? Or I've been married for 35 years, which I have been, and I'm happily married. So I'm happy in my marriage, right? But fulfillment is actually a feeling of satisfaction. And that feeling of satisfaction can come in a variety of different ways. It can be a certification that you achieve, it can be a certain achievement. It can be career related or it can be personal. I've coached sports teams when my son was younger. He's an adult now, and there was fulfillment at the end of the season if we achieved a certain level of victory. Right? Of course, if we won a championship, which we never did, but even there was still fulfillment. Sometimes even just winning a certain game, there was fulfillment in that. So happiness and fulfillment can actually feel similar, but there is a distinction. And actually, Tim, there's a study that I think I mentioned to you that is called the happiness U curve. It was published by the US National Labor Bureau of Statistics, published in 2020. So just a couple of years old.
Yep.
And even though it's a US government body that did the study, it's a global study. And that's what's fascinating about it. And what they found was, and this is mind blowing, what they found was that people peak in their happiness at age 18, peak at age 18,
Yeah.
and then begin to become less happy. And we bottom out in our happiness in our mid 40s.
Right.
And then we begin to become happy again in ensuing years. So it's called a happiness U curve. So for the letter U, so the top of the left side of the U is age 18, and then we begin to become less happy and we bottom out at the bottom of the U, and then we begin to climb up the other side of the U curve with more happiness past
Is
our
that
mid.
when we pay our mortgage off or the
That
kids
can
leave?
be one
Is
reason.
that what the happiness is?
That can
Sorry.
be one reason. But I
I'm just
argue though that there's still a little bit of confusion between happiness and fulfillment. So for example, on my podcast, the Midlife Fulfilled podcast, which of
Yep.
course is where I talk about all this,
Mm.
I give an example of a college professor who can be very fulfilled in her career. She can have all these wonderful achievements, accreditations, published work, highly respected and as a college professor. But if she has personal relationships that lack meaning and she's lonely and all these other things, she can be unhappy yet fulfilled, right? In her career. The opposite is true. You can be very happy, but also unfulfilled in areas of your life. And the biggest one is our career. That's the biggest one. I so many stories that I'm covering on my podcast, and I know we're planning to have you on my podcast. I'm looking forward to that.
Mm.
So many stories are career related, where at some point early in their life, they were unfulfilled, and then they figured something out, and usually it's a set of circumstances, or sometimes even one circumstance. I think I can think of one episode where she had said she was fired, and it's the best thing that happened to her, because it sort of enabled her to figure out what she really wanted to do and what she really wanted to become in order to achieve that fulfillment. But it's something that for many of us can take either circumstances or even a span of time to figure that out.
And I think that is probably the case for a number of people, not everybody, because you're then in a position where you're having that circumstance means you need to think differently. But quite often people go through a process of mourning, don't they? Through there's the anger, and then and they have to go through that and that decompression before they may get to the other side and say, actually, this is a gift. And I need to use this gift.
Exactly. What happens most often is people come to a realization that they simply didn't have in the previous years,
Mm.
because circumstances hadn't happened yet. So it's always a set of circumstances that really gives people that opportunity to sort of come out the other side with this realization that they didn't have previously. What one of my podcast guests says, I didn't realize that what I really feared was not failure. I feared success. And
Mm.
he went on to explain, he said, I feared success because I didn't quite know exactly what it would take. And eventually, when I realized what it would take to achieve that success, that's when the fear really kicked in. But it also gave me the realization that I needed to embrace that fear to overcome it. But his message was, I didn't fear failure, I feared success. And that's something that, it for most of us, it doesn't happen early in life. We have to go through certain ups and downs and bumps and bruises and scars, and experiences, or getting fired, whatever it might be. For each one of us, it's unique to come to those realizations.
Yes, and I think I've seen quite often the way I describe it is some people are scared of heights, in a metaphorical format, which is where they get to a certain level, and actually the success they get, they don't know what to do with it, and therefore they don't want to push on further, or they actually do something and kind of self-sabotage themselves because they want to go lower, because they're scared of what they've achieved. I guess it's you get that syndrome where you feel that you're not the person, you're not the person that you should be. Yeah, I can understand that. You talk about the 80/20 principle. What's that?
So, when I was planning to launch my podcast,
Mm.
the first thing I did, Tim, was I settled on the topic of midlife because it was just on my mind a lot. And I started reading up on midlife, and I started to realize that it's not just, influenced by age. And I came across the happiness U curve study, and I just devoured that. And that was eye opening for me. And then, somewhere in the context of studying the happiness U curve, I came across the 80/20 principle. And part of what really inspired me to dig deeper into the 80/20 principle was the research that I did, albeit very brief.
Yep.
78% of the people who responded to that question about fulfillment saying that they're not totally fulfilled.
Yeah.
78%. 19% said that they were totally fulfilled. So look at that ratio, right? I mean, it's pretty much 80/20, isn't it?
Yep. It is, yeah.
So when I did research on 80/20, one of the realizations that I came to is that it isn't meant to be literal, just like 78 and 19 are not literally 80/20. It's meant to be a principle, right? And that is that, 80% of the outcome is coming from 20% of a cause, right? So what I basically concluded is if 78% of the people said that they're not totally fulfilled, then again, using the 80/20 principle, well, then maybe if we can get to 80% fulfilled, we're doing okay.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yes.
most people are not 80% fulfilled, especially as we are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and we have more life, experiences. We may not be that, 80% fulfilled in our life. So, as I just dug into that principle, I just realized that that principle applies to so many aspects. You've been in business for a long time, you've been in sales, sales leadership, sales training, and you can think of many ways that 80/20 principle has played in your own career, perhaps outside your career and in other areas of life. It's just everywhere. So, what I do is I take that principle and I encourage people to think, if you can be 80% fulfilled, you're doing great.
Mhm.
And to strive to 100%, while it's admirable, it's pretty hard to achieve. And I would even argue not attainable if you're really honest with yourself. Because if you want to achieve 100% fulfillment, that also implies that you're willing to be complacent. Because don't you want to keep going,
Yeah.
growing, and accomplishing and achieving, right? So unless you're willing to just hit a certain plateau and say, "Okay, I'm done. I'm 100% fulfilled," most of us don't say that. That means we're never going to be 100% fulfilled. So if we can get to 80% fulfilled, we're doing great. And actually, I end each podcast episode saying exactly that, Tim. If you're
Right.
80% fulfilled, you're doing great.
Mm. And I think, sometimes we can be too hard on ourselves, can't we? In terms of we can look out into the world and see, oh, they've just got a new car, or they've got, and actually you've probably got all the things that you need. You actually don't need that new car. It would be nice to have it sitting on the. I mean, I don't drive my car anymore because I live in London. We either use public transport, or it just don't, because of COVID. I just don't travel what I used to do. There's certain things that you don't need, and maybe that's part of when you get to a certain age, when you start realizing, I don't need a Porsche. I never had one, but I don't need a Porsche sitting on the drive that I'm never going to drive. So I might as well be fulfilled with my Mini, which is 7 years old and is just as good. Well,
Yep.
I can go faster because it's nippy. I don't know if nippy is a word used in America.
Yep. Yep. Another area that came to light in the survey that I did was the areas of life that people want to be fulfilled in. And the number one and number two areas of life, and you'll see in just a moment when I list them, that they're closely tied together. The number one area of life that people wanted to be fulfilled in is physical fitness,
Yeah.
fitness. And the number two was physical health,
Yeah.
right? And obviously they're closely tied to each other.
Yeah.
And material things were way, way down on the list. I
Yeah.
mean, there were other things that are on the list, things like relationships and faith and philanthropy, but physical things way down on the list. So people are concerned about their physical fitness, their physical health, their mental health as well,
Yep.
right? So because if we don't have some of those basics, I mean, you can almost e- equate them, if you will, to like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we don't have some of those fundamentals in our life, then what good is a boat or a car or a house or any of these big material things going to do for you? I mean, we all either know people who have big boats, cars, and homes that are unhappy, or have either died prematurely or sadly, in some cases, committed suicide,
Yep.
right? And then, you wonder like, wow, they had it all, or at least we thought they had it all. And they did when it comes to material things, but they didn't have what they needed most,
Yeah.
right?
And it's
And
that
we
it's that it's that difference between happiness and fulfillment, isn't it? which you said earlier on, which is the boat may make you happy, but does it really fulfill? Um, is it merely making you fulfilled as as an individual? Because you may, or you may, as what you may have is to sit on the boat by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one of the most unfulfilled roles in society is the CEO.
Hmm.
He or she is often unfulfilled because they set the bar very high on themselves. So they feel like they're almost, never achieving what they want to achieve because they
Yeah.
just have a very high bar. Plus the demands that are on them that are placed on them by just everything around them, from their employees to stakeholders, investors, the media, culture, you name it, right? All these pressures that are put on them. And so quite often they are unfulfilled. And from the outside looking into them, you look at them and you go, wow, the money, the status, the title, all the things that seem to be so appealing, but yet many of them are unfulfilled for some of these reasons that I mentioned. That's why I'm on this topic. I'm so passionate about this topic because I just came to realize how important it is for us to achieve an adequate level of fulfillment in our life.
Yeah, I think leadership is a lonely place, and the first time I moved into leadership, you suddenly realise that um, you when you were when you were a sales individual contributor, after a sales meeting, you'd all ring each other and have a conversation. The first meeting that you're running your sales leader, you suddenly realize that nobody rings you. And you suddenly realize this is actually leadership is alone is lonely. And I think that's the same with the CEOs, because people can tell you what they think you want to hear, well, all kinds of things. And Yeah, I think it's you have to find your own fulfillment and your own happiness in it. As like with probably with any role, but yeah, very true.
Yeah. Yeah. So what it boils down to for most of us, because I mentioned that the happiness U curve study was a global study, and I have a chart that's on a blog post on my website at midlifefulfilled.com, and in that chart it shows different regions of the world and what that U curve looks like. And the U curve, while it's not identical because it has different, you know, curves on it, it is nonetheless consistent. And so what it comes down to, because all human creatures, no matter what region of the world we come from, it boils down to relationships
Mm.
and the meaning of relationships, the impact of relationships. And as a successful salesperson, Tim, relationships are extremely important from a sales success standpoint. But we're talking about relationships just in life, right? So you and I enjoy relationships, within the business network that we've
Yeah.
developed over the years, but it's bigger than that, right? It's just relationships in life with people, our immediate family, neighbors, people in a community, and just building meaningful relationships with people, and then having a sense of feeling appreciated by giving of yourself, right? One of the things that I say, that if you really want to feel important, if you want to feel significant, if you want to just feel better, then be generous.
Mm.
And define generosity how you want to define it,
Mm.
right? A lot of times it's associated with money. It doesn't have to be.
No.
Just spending an hour with someone and
Yeah.
being a good listener is generous,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
you
Yeah, it's
know?
good.
So, and that can help you achieve some fulfillment that you may be lacking. And the thing, Tim, that I just see over and over again is that oftentimes we don't even know that we're unfulfilled until some circumstance happens. And then this light bulb goes on and goes, oh, now I understand. I was unfulfilled in this chapter, whatever that chapter was, because now you're experiencing something else and you just didn't realize it. You knew something was off.
Mm.
You knew something was off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it, right? And I call it the new F word, fulfillment, right? Is just, understanding that we all need fulfillment,
Yeah.
right?
So, Bernie, thank you so much for today. Remind people where's your podcast?
So the podcast is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. The podcast is called Midlife Fulfilled. I do have a website, and it's the
Yep.
midlifefulfilled.com.
.com.
That's the website. The podcast is there as well as a blog. So, but anywhere you listen to podcasts, Midlife Fulfilled podcast.
Okay. And if people want to contact you, it would be LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is the easiest way. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bernie, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing that for something which is quite a unique insight into life. And I think that you've done some great research, and I think you're onto something.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy this conversation. It's always good to see you.
And we'll talk again soon.
You bet.
Okay. Thanks, Bernie. Stay safe.